We know that elected politicians who are failing at their jobs oftentimes want to find ways to distract us from their failures with crazy legislation. So let's look at what's happening in 2022. Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Governed. And as I have mentioned before, we are reporting from Washington State, the state of eternal emergency. And just for clarity's sake and a trigger warning, nothing I say here has been approved by Governor Inslee's Ministry of COVID Compliance. And although I don't plan on talking about COVID at all, it's worth it for you to know that if you only want to hear what the government wants you to hear, please stop watching right now. So moving right into this, and as we've mentioned in some recent videos, this guy really needs to distract us from the terrible job that he's doing as state governor. And in Washington State, Inslee, if he can't distract you with orca whales, he's going to try and distract you with something else. And the state legislative session is really, really worth looking at, and some of the crazy bills that are coming up. And I'm only going to touch on a couple of them today, but it's worth looking at these as they have hearings moving forward. Now, when you really look at some of these bills, in particular on the gun rights bills, I want to point out and really encourage everybody to sign up to this group here. It's WashingtonCivilRights.org. It's WaCivilRights.org. That is their website. I encourage you to go there, sign up for them. These guys are doing a phenomenal job documenting bills and making it easy for you to log in and oppose or support, if you do, any of the legislation that's on the agenda here in the 2022 legislative session. If you're interested in doing it, follow what these guys are doing, because this is actually a very effective tool. I'm very impressed with the methodology they're using and their way of communicating, and they're doing just a really good job. And so one of the things to remember when we're talking about gun control is always that, I'm going to put that in quotes, gun control, it's always been a pet project of billionaires who really want to fund and restrict ways to prevent poor people from protecting themselves. And this has always been how what it's been about. I filed ballot title challenges on some of the previous anti-gun initiatives in this state, and it was always interesting to notice that it was always very wealthy guys on the other side who were funding those campaigns. Billionaires like this, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Nick Hanauer, for some local billionaire flavor, throwing millions of dollars into anti-gun efforts at every opportunity that they have. And of course, there's Michael Bloomberg out of New York, former mayor out there and failed presidential candidate. Nobody's ever wasted as much money as he has running for the office of president and gotten very little to show for it. Nevertheless, he keeps throwing millions of dollars as well into finding as many ways as they can to restrict your ability to protect yourself and defend yourself from crime. This seems to be one of their highest priorities because they keep putting amazing amounts of money into it all the time. And of course, it's only going to affect poor people because it doesn't affect them. These guys have armed security. They pay for armed security to protect them. They know that you can't afford that, but the only option you have is to be able to buy a firearm and protect yourself, especially in this escalating crime wave that we're seeing with this anti-cop movement and very leftist DAs, oftentimes also funded by these people, who are getting into office and refuse to prosecute criminals. Instead, they like to release them back in on us so they can victimize more of us next time. So these guys don't want you to be able to protect yourself, so they're always endorsing and supporting bills that do just that. And it's always it's just fascinating to see always these very wealthy guys basically finding these ways to restrict your freedom and rights. I'll link to some reports down below if you want to see some of the millions and millions of dollars they're throwing into all these campaigns, and anybody that supports them, which is one of the reasons why you get more legislators than you would expect to support terrible bills like this, because these guys also promise to give money to those politicians. So I want to show this little chart here just to give you an example. And again, the WashingtonCivilRights.org group that I mentioned earlier has these charts there, and it shows a report from two recent hearings in the Senate where they basically discuss, it's kind of the preliminary hearing on several of these proposed bills. And just to show you the citizen opposition, Senate Bill 5217 was actually to take away a bunch of semi-automatic firearms and make them illegal in Washington State. And you can see that 4,371 people signed in. This is the official con statement where they said they didn't want that bill. And the organized billionaire groups down below were only able to get 363 people to sign up and say that it was a good idea. And another similar bill is 5568, you see there on the screen to your right, I believe. And that's 2,847 people who said they don't want that bill. And that bill actually makes it easier for cities to come up with their own ways of restricting your ability to defend yourself, come up with unique gun laws, and an attempt to overturn the preemption statute in Washington. So as you see, citizens who care about these issues are opposed to them, and they actually want the ability to defend themselves. And the billionaires, however, want to restrict that. And that is, of course, similar to what some of these legislators, including this one, Patty Kuderer, we mentioned her earlier when I did another video about, she was one of the prime sponsors of a bill to take away free speech rights in Washington state. And here she is again, always, as always, to be counted on in another effort to take away some of your constitutional rights. In this case, the right to defend yourself and keep and bear arms. She obviously doesn't like that. She thinks that that right needs to be removed from you, and she's trying to do it with some of the bills that she's sponsoring. What was most interesting really was her quote here, which was where she said that constitutionality is merely in the eyes of the beholder. There's no constitutional rights that you really have. You can just whimsically change them when you want to, and that's what she's hoping to do right now. Of course, the troubling thing is that you actually have people in elected office who have those kind of thoughts, and this is a good example of somebody who probably shouldn't be in any elected office anywhere, let alone in the state Senate. But she's showing her true colors here and her willingness to destroy your freedoms and rights at every chance she gets. And she testified to that fact right there in the hearing. And if there's one advantage that we do have with Zoom sessions, as bad as they are and as miserable as they've made the legislative session lately, at least we get to see her in her own words explain to us why she doesn't like our freedoms and our constitutional rights. So one thing is, Inslee does seem to be constantly trying to encourage or come up with any other ways to distract citizens from his failures as governor. Miserable decisions that he's made, like trying to push taxes that people don't want, like losing over $1 billion in the employment security fraud scheme that was exposed last year with the Nigerian, so-called Nigerian fraud scheme that went in. Inslee's got to distract us, so he's pushing, along with his Democratic allies right now, and so far they're only Democrats that are pushing these bad ideas, and look at what some of these bills actually are. Now, as I mentioned earlier, suppressing free speech, that was our last bill that we had, and there we go. We got 5843, Senate Bill 5843. This one was actually written by Governor Inslee. Don't you dare question the results of elections. He wants to put you in prison if he can, if you dare to do that. So suppressing free speech, that's check. Inslee's got that one under control. And as we just discussed, an attempt to prevent you from having the ability to defend yourself and nibbling away at those Second Amendment rights every chance you got. I referenced 3 different bills here, but there's actually a couple more in that mix as well, but it's just worth pointing out. These are ones that Inslee likes. Check, he's got that under control. Also attacking farmers. Attacking farmers is kind of a classic thing that Inslee likes to do at every chance he has. In this case, we're talking about House Bill 1838. This bill actually takes buffers and just makes them huge, mostly destroying agriculture and farmland and preventing farmers from being able to grow crops or have animals. So therefore, check. Inslee figures that those people don't vote for him anyway. He likes to make their life as miserable as possible, and he has a lot of special interests, including some of these billionaires I mentioned earlier, who will give him money if he can find more ways to attack local agriculture. So there we go. We got Inslee covering those bases. Here's a couple more that he has also been involved in as well. Now, this one's made national news. This is attacking urban residents. Find a way to make life as miserable as possible if you live in an urban environment. And specifically, it's with House Bill 1692. Now, this has been known as the drive-by shooting bill, which is a bill that Democrats proposed in the state legislature to make it easier for you to go out and shoot people from your car and get away with it and not receive any special penalties and keep you out of jail. I mean, there's nothing more important to the Democrats than keeping drive-by shooters out of jail. Inslee seems to think this is a good idea, despite the fact that disproportionately the victims of drive-by shooting happen to be minority residents, but who cares? The Democrats never have cared about minorities anyway, and they don't care about people who and they do care about people who are shooting them, of course. So the most important thing is to keep the people who are shooting the residents of the state out of jail and instead make sure that they're released early and that they go back in the population, so presumably they can do some more of it. This bill did get national news. It is one of the stupidest, most incompetent, terrible ideas that's been proposed lately, particularly in the middle of a fairly significant crime wave in Washington state. But that's Governor Inslee for you and his allies in the legislature. These are the things they like to do. Now, as always, he is working overtime to attack voting integrity. And this seems to also be another one of these ideas that Democrats can't get enough of. Anything they can do to destroy the voting system in Washington state, that's a high priority, destroying voter integrity. And the latest one is this 5584. And This one has to do with ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting is basically a way to destroy the transparency of the voting process, particularly when you've got a lot of different candidates there, by making it so confusing and impossible to audit that when they recently tried it in New York City, they couldn't even figure out who won the election. It took them many, many days to even figure out who won. Nobody could figure it out. And of course, that is a nice thing if you are a political insider and you know how to manipulate the process and manage who's behind the scenes. That's a great system to have, one that you can never really audit effectively or figure out what's going on. Another absurd idea, but it's a classic one that Governor Inslee's had. Now, there's a lot more than what I just covered, but that's enough to get you started and give you a flavor for Inslee's plan and the Democrats' plan in the state legislatures. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And Inslee's obviously searching for any other way that he can hurt us and, in the process of hurting us, see if that can distract us from the failures of this administration. Now, there's nothing particularly new about that. This is what politicians do when they are failing. They really need to distract us from their failures. At the federal level, that's going to be they don't want you to be aware of the inflation disaster or the failures of the national mandates. At the state level, the national mandates or the local mandates and the endless emergency powers that have been abused by Governor Inslee, and certainly the escalating crime wave, not just here but across the country, and the collapse, these different regulations and how they're impacting the supply chain, and all this other drama, the endless drama of basically very poor political decisions. If you want to trash the country, the best thing you can do is to give these politicians more power, and they will find ways to inflict the maximum harm, confusion, and chaos they can. And so a lot of these bills don't really have much chance of getting out of the legislature. I think that's probably a true analysis. And the opposition that they're inspiring with those bills clearly shows that these are not popular ideas. Most people don't want them. However, I still think they get proposed because it's a way to distract you from other things that they can do that are a little bit quieter, more in the background, particularly passing tax increases or regulatory, just the ever-increasing regulatory advancement of the administrative state. So whatever it is, I think it's important just to keep an eye, pay attention to these stupid bills, sign in. I want to encourage you to go in and sign in. Go to WashingtonCivilRights.org. Those guys are great with giving you an easy way to get on and oppose or support bills if they're good. And also look at other groups like the Farm Bureau or Citizens Alliance for Property Rights that do a good job spreading information about which bills are good and bad. Pay attention, and it's easy to sign up. I'll have some links down below of how you can get on and make comment on some of these bills, and I think you'll find that useful and helpful. I'll also link below to all the bills if you want to see what they look like, if I've referenced them in this video. And if you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. You can sign up for our free email newsletter there. Feel free to support us if you like what we're doing. And also, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with others. The more people who do that, the more the word gets out there. And remember, if you care about your future and the future of your community, you have to be engaged and involved because the future belongs to those who show up.